You guys already know. My perspective is that veganism is a political movement, and the leaders involved in it are political actors. Some of them very self-aware political actors, and some of them kind of sleepwalking into the role. Sleepwalking their way into the role, or sleepwalking their way out of the role. But look, not everybody can be Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton, in his heyday, was famous for his ability to walk into a McDonald's and shake the hands of every employee at the McDonald's and make them feel special. Make them feel like they were the center of his world. They had his undivided attention for those few minutes. And I remember an anecdote. It was specifically from a McDonald's. I believe it was in the lead up to Bill Clinton's first election. Could have been his re-election, I forget. Where he went into this McDonald's, and it wasn't planned. The other people working with him, he spontaneously insisted that the whole party of people who were with him go to a particular McDonald's. And, you know, everybody there, the guys, the busboys wiping down the tables, and the people frying their French fries in the back, he took the time to shake their hands and look into their eyes and make them feel like you are the backbone of this nation. You are the future of America. Without people like you, America can't stand up. You are the backbone of this nation. People will really feel it. He had that magnetic and yet magnanimous energy about him that, of course, is completely phony. And I mean, you know, it has a certain kind of political power to it. I mean, you know, it put him into power, and he still had it when he went out of power. But I mean, you know, it's needless to say, guys, I'm not a fan of Bill Clinton in terms of the ethical decisions he made in his life, the political decisions he made in his life. And even now, Bill Clinton, believe it or not, still is a dietary vegan. I've never heard him say that he's an ethical vegan. But contrary to some fallacious rumors in the press, Bill Clinton is actually still a dietary vegan. So he's part of our movement in his own strange way. Now, if people were complaining that compared to Bill Clinton, I just don't have what it takes, you know, to communicate with my audience, to communicate with my supporters, or to sit down in a room of my detractors, my critics, my enemies, and turn them into my friend. I'd say, hey, you know what? You got a point. Not everybody's Bill Clinton. And I do not think of myself as the Bill Clinton of the vegan movement, past, present, or future. And hey, man, you know what? You picked a good example, and I can completely own up to not being on Bill Clinton's level in that way. And you know, I'm not motivated in the same way Bill Clinton is. You know, I got different goals in life. And indeed, if I was more involved in Canadian party politics, I also wouldn't operate like Bill Clinton. Among other things, both ethically and in terms of respect, I really don't like to lie to people. And I think that Bill Clinton's act involves quite a lot of lying, even if the lies are flattering, even if the lies are warmly received by the people he's lying to. But look, enough about that. What's absurd to me is, just in the last 3 days, I've seen many, many comments and criticisms directed my way. And I've heard this over the years. I've heard this many times over the last several years. But especially in the last few days, the criticism that runs as follows. They first say, you know, this guy Eisel, or this guy à-bas-le-ciel, he's brilliant, he has a lot to contribute to the movement, he's intelligent, he says some useful things. But, you know, he's gauche. He just can't communicate with people, he can't cooperate with people, he can't discuss politics with people, is really what it comes down to. Oh, compared to what? What's striking to me about this is, well, are you comparing me to Richard, to Vegan Gains? Okay. Are you comparing me to Brianna Jackfruitson? Are you comparing me to Freely? Freely, who's had some horrible misanthropic tirades in her day, and I've seen her so many times, especially against other females on YouTube, being an unbelievably cruel battle axe, you know, belittling people and humiliating people and insulting them, you know, in the worst way possible. Who am I being compared to here? I mean, Richard, you know, he's very good at certain things. He's very good at reading a whole bunch of peer-reviewed scientific articles and putting together a précis of that information in a way that's, you know, interesting and engaging and tells you something useful about atherosclerosis or, you know, heart disease or what have you. He's very good at that. However, Richard himself believes he has some kind of undiagnosed mental problem. He talks a lot about his social awkwardness. You know, I've done just one conversation by Skype with Richard where I had both audio and video. And many of the problems, he complains about himself openly, like in his recent video about his marriage. The problems he has communicating, I can really see them in that conversation where you talk to him and he just doesn't react, and you got eye contact and you're looking at him, but you're wondering, did you hear what I just said? And there are just weird pauses and silences, and it's hard to communicate with him. He's aware of it. He talks about it himself. He says he has social awkwardness. And, he used to, ponder on whether or not he had a condition like being a sociopath or a psychopath. He ponders on that a lot. He is someone who has trouble communicating with others. So, and these other people in the game, so what? I'm sorry, I forget the actual condition, but recently, Bite-Size Vegan, a.k.a. Emily, came out of the closet as having one of the autistic spectrum disorders. I wonder if one day Swayze, a natural vegan, will come out of the closet as having some kind of autistic spectrum disorder. There are a lot of people here on YouTube who communicate political ideas, for many, many hours of video per year, who actually have really, really serious difficulty communicating with people. So in that context, it's funny to say, but no, I'm not Bill Clinton. I don't play his game by his rules, and I don't have his kind of charm. And I don't. There's a famous quote from I think it was Queen Victoria. I'm sorry, I may be quoting the wrong queen. One of the queens of England, and she said, let's say it was Queen Victoria. She said, this prime minister. She was contrasting two different prime ministers. This prime minister was a brilliant man because when I spoke to him, he made me feel that he was the most brilliant man in England. But this other prime minister who came later, he had the more refined art. Because when I was talking to him, he made me feel as if I was the most brilliant woman in all of England. And I guess it's that second skill, that Bill Clinton had. Not impressing you with his intelligence, but just making you feel like you're the center of his world for those few minutes, that you're the greatest thing, that it's not that Bill Clinton made you feel inspired by him. He made you think that you were an inspiration to Bill Clinton. You know what I'm saying? So there's more than one way to play the game, and there are different players who bring different skills to it. But yes, it is bizarre to me to see that so many people want to come out with that, when the contrast is to somebody like Gary Yourofsky. Do I think I'm worse at communication of exactly this kind than Gary Yourofsky? We just looked at a bunch of clips. I'm not going to put the clips in again. Of Gary Yourofsky screaming blue murder, screaming violent, offensive nonsense at, a journalist in Israel. We've seen him lose his temper and give these kinds of violent tirades so many times in these kinds of forums. And, okay, you can sit there and use your mind's eye and you can imagine what kind of interview you think I would give if I were on that news show. I'm not saying I'm the best person at it. You know what? Maybe Brianna Jack-Fruitson would do an even better job than me. Maybe. Maybe Richard. On a good day, Richard probably could do a good interview like that, sitting down. I definitely think Richard would do a better job than Gary Yourofsky. Definitely. But I say Richard is a little bit socially awkward. I don't know. Bite-Size Vegan. She's now named the disorder she has. I don't know. When she's off script, I don't know how good a job she does. A natural vegan, whenever she's not reading a script, she's terrible on camera. Her ability to talk during a live stream or a spontaneous unscripted video is absolute garbage, in my opinion. And again, I don't know what the reasons are. Different people bring different skills to the game. One of my brothers is a very talented musician. He can't talk worth a damn. And I have another brother who talks a real good game, but unfortunately he used those skills just to get himself drunk and stoned and laid his whole life. Really, he slept with a huge number of women. Not everyone who's got the gift of the gab decides to use it to try to organize a dissident political movement. So hey guys, you're not stuck with me. You got choices. Go to Brianna Jack-Fruitson's channel if you like her swag, if you think she does a better game talking about these issues. Shout out to everyone who's playing the game, because this is a game in which everybody gets to make their own rules. And I gave Brianna Jack-Fruitson an award for Most Improved Channel. People get older, people change. I'm really not saying it to snub her. If you look at what she did a couple of years ago compared to what she's doing today, she's improved a lot. Maybe at some point her content is going to get more profound and more engaged. Even somebody, shout out to Supreme Banana. Life is long. She's going to get bored of doing wacky restaurant videos. She already is bored. She's clinically depressed. She's miserable with her life. She could totally move on to doing more substantive content or being more of an articulate political leader. Totally. Do it. Eclipse me. Leave me in your dust, and I'll be happy for you. This is not a zero-sum game. Everybody's playing by their own rules. If you can succeed in your lane, I'm going to cheer you on. And I hope you can cheer me on when I'm in my tiny lane with my tiny audience, talking about things that are not interesting to all that many people. A couple thousand people stop by. That's wonderful. I appreciate you. I have just about 200 supporters on Patreon. That's wonderful. I appreciate you. But how big do you think the total size of this audience is? Keep it real. All right. I'm going to read and respond to criticism from a viewer. Some people think I don't respond to criticism. I do all the time. I'm going to do it right now for the 10,000th time. I have tons of videos doing that. I just mentioned, by the way, I'm not really big on overhyping the health benefits of a vegan diet. But right now, this is me with 4 hours of sleep. I fell asleep last night at 2 a.m. because I lifted weights until about 1:30 a.m. I had 4 hours of sleep, and I just did about 4 hours of teaching at the university. Yeah, about 4 one-hour lectures. And I feel great. No, I would feel even better if I had 10 hours of sleep. No doubt. But it's actually at times like this. It's really in illness or when you're kind of pressed, one way or the other, that I notice the subtle health advantages I have because I'm vegan. Being vegan didn't transform me into a superhuman by any stretch of the imagination, but I do have some health benefits. And right now I'm really feeling it because I've had a great day. I've had 4 hours of sleep, and actually my day was really wonderful. Stressful in some ways, but I cope with the stress. It buoyed me up. I'm in high spirits. And right now it's 9 o'clock at night. I'm recording this video. Feeling great. Okay. So with that having been noted, if this was in color, you could see I do have red eyes. I do have some signs of sleep deprivation. But let's keep rolling. Okay. So this is an anonymous comment I received, commenting criticism. All right. She starts, I'm assuming it's a female author. She starts by saying, everybody who's gone vegan in the last 10 years has been influenced by Gary Yourofsky to some extent. Okay, but is that influence positive or negative? That's not the deepest question, but that's the type of question I get into on my channel. And I'm of the opinion, the very well-informed opinion, that his influence is largely negative. Have I been influenced by Gary Yourofsky? Well, I've produced videos criticizing him, so therefore, in a sense, I have. This is the lowest rung of political evaluation. I've been influenced by Bill Clinton, too, but doesn't mean it's a positive thing. Doesn't mean I'm going to model the future of the vegan movement on the career of Bill Clinton, not by any means. She complains that people have misquoted Gary Yourofsky, taken him out of context, and demonized him for his actions. Okay, so let me ask you, anonymous writer, do you think that's happened to me? What you've just said, Gary Yourofsky has suffered, has that or has that not happened to me? Am I or am I not right now in a court case with Durian Rider? My court date is coming right up. I'm finally flying back to Chiang Mai to have my next day in court, my next hearing in that long process. Have I not suffered the slings and arrows of defamation? I'm still in court for my own divorce, also for custody of my daughter. And in theory, the kind of defamation I suffer in one could affect the other. Have I not been defamed by people like Vegan Cheetah saying unforgivable things about, my marriage and divorce, my wife, my daughter, my sex life, and, all kinds of people. But Durian Rider is an extreme example, doing what you say. My new girlfriend, the first time I talked to her dad, obviously her dad and her brothers also, she has 2 brothers, they kind of had questions about this. Like, well, why is there so much defamation about you on the internet? And what I said to them was, look, in the 21st century, if you are a political figure, no matter how tiny your influence, you deal with the same kind of defamation that major political figures face. You have, in effect, all the disadvantages of fame without any of the advantages. Okay? I accept the fact that if I want to play this role, if I just want to come on the internet and talk about politics, I have to deal with criticism, both reasonable and unreasonable. I have to deal with, sadly, criminal defamation that sometimes goes to a criminal court to be addressed. And if I were in formal politics, if I were with Canada's NDP, a New Democrat Party, our left-wing party, I would have to deal with all of this flack also. But I would be doing it for a cause I don't believe in. Veganism is a cause I believe in. And that's why it's worthwhile for me to come on the internet and do this. I had way more hits, way more viewers when I did videos about Game of Thrones, also known as A Song of Ice and Fire. That's a book series. That's also a TV series. Okay? My first video on that got over 10,000 viewers. Whole new audience. Way more positive audience. Way more appreciative than what I have for veganism. Okay? I may, in the future, I'd like to do some more videos talking about Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire. Why not? It's a series of books I care about. It's interesting, and partly for political reasons of political philosophy. Okay? If I were chasing views, I would have gone to that lane and stayed there. If I was chasing YouTube money, YouTube revenue, okay? Fundamentally, veganism is a cause I care about, okay? It's the future of the movement that makes this worthwhile, all right? So what are you going to tell me? The future of the movement just doesn't make it worthwhile for Gary? Because just what you've said, because people have misquoted him, taken him out of context and demonized him, really? Well, okay, did Bill Clinton have to deal with that? Yes or no? Every third-rate politician for the Republican Party, running for state caucus in Iowa, running for village alderman. And you think nobody else has to deal with that? Really? I think if you're looking at the balance of these things, the risk to reward, Gary Yourofsky is one of the winners. He got a lot of reward for very little risk and for suffering very little in terms of those slings and arrows. All right? I continue. Quote, "You speak as if his sacrifice has been minimal. The guy has literally given his life to speak up for the voiceless." Close quote. No. No, sister. He has not literally given his life. And I've got two different angles I want to take in response to this. By the way, this is a completely unscripted video. I have the letter on screen, but this is spontaneous with 4 hours of sleep. He has not literally given his life. That would be dying for the cause. Okay? But implicit in your approach here is a fundamentally Christian mindset, culturally Christian mindset, that sacrifice is what makes something worthy. Self-sacrifice. That you got to die on the cross to be down for the cause. Okay? I don't see the world that way. Culturally, I've been influenced by Christianity too. I talked about that in my recent video about vegans dating vegans, my conversation with Tofu Goddess. Great series of videos. Really down-to-earth conversation. But I said, look, you know what? I turned a corner in my life. I used to even think in my romantic relationships that self-sacrifice was this crucial value. And I had to stop and realize this is just a Christian cultural assumption. It really doesn't add up to much. It's not worth much. So no, he hasn't given up his life for the cause. He hasn't, in that literal sense, as you say, literally. But you got to remember, I don't measure the value of someone's contribution by how much it subtracts from their life. I measure it by how much it adds to the lives of others, to the future of the movement. Okay? And your attitude here in writing this, you may not be aware of it, is the opposite. This is totally based on a picture of Gary Yourofsky as super victim. That because he suffered so much, he must be morally pure, he must be morally good, and how dare I question the value of his intellectual legacy or of his political beliefs or teachings. Okay? That's the angle you've taken with this. And on a profound level, you're dead wrong. I speak as if Gary Yourofsky's sacrifice has been minimal, she says. I speak as if it's zero. Gary Yourofsky did not sacrifice his life for the vegan cause. It would be totally unreasonable for me to say I sacrificed 3 years of my life for this YouTube channel. It would be totally unreasonable for me to say I've sacrificed 2 years of my life to publish a children's storybook. That would be ludicrous hyperbole. Ludicrous. Even though those are things I've had going on in my life for 3 years and 2 years, sure. The book is probably going to take, I don't know, at least another 6 months to happen, right? My court case has been going on for almost a year. These things are part of your life. Gary Yourofsky, circa 1999, was a part-time supply teacher. And people donated so much money to him that he could quit that job and pursue his dream full-time. His dream job. Activism. That's not sacrificing. It's not that he passionately wanted to be a part-time supply teacher and he had to sacrifice that to be a vegan activist. Okay? That's what makes his retirement letter so incoherent. This was his dream. He was supposed to be living his dream because of money that his supporters donated to him that enabled him to live that dream. Right? And instead, he's now telling you, well, forget it. Doesn't matter how much money you give me. Because vegans are a bunch of, quote, unwashed hippies, unquote, who are, quote, pacifist, unquote. He can't deal with the criticism from pacifists by email. So he's quitting the movement. He retired before from his job as a part-time school teacher, and he's retiring now from his role, his dream job that he created for himself and that donors like you enabled as being a speaker for the vegan movement. Okay? You say, anonymous author, you say that the guy has given his life to speak for the voiceless because of the number of lectures he lists that he's given. So he's given 2,000 lectures in 12 years. I'm sorry, those are not the numbers from memory. He gives a certain number of lectures. I think it's 2,600 over a certain number of years. No. I gave 4 lectures today. In one day, I gave 4 university-level lectures. And unlike Gary Yourofsky, it's not the same lecture over and over again. This week, I lectured on Plato. Next week, I'm going to lecture on Aristotle. Okay, and I lecture simultaneously in Chinese and English. Yes, I speak English much better than I speak Chinese, but I'm actually having to speak in English and then explain in Chinese and write words in Chinese on the blackboard. Okay, this is high-level reasoning when I'm in the classroom. I did that for 4 hours today, and I'm not too worn out now to come on YouTube and talk to you. I'm not self-pitying like Gary Yourofsky and think I got it so bad. You know why? Okay, so you can add up how many lectures I give in a year. You could add up the lectures I give on YouTube and however many 100 lectures I give at the university and in other contexts this year. And I could say, oh, I've given so many 100 lectures. I wouldn't say I'm suffering. Are you joking? People live for this. People love this. Gary Yourofsky's role has been fundamentally like a stand-up comedian. Except unlike a stand-up comedian, he never needs any new material. He told the same jokes again and again for more than 10 years. Every university professor I know, every single one, gives more lectures than Gary Yourofsky. That's what we do. Okay, in this line of work, whether it is stand-up comedy or university-level teaching, there are human beings who every week give 12 lectures, 18 lectures, and it's not repeating the same old story over and over again. Okay? In many ways, the path Gary Yourofsky chose for himself, his dream job that he chose for himself, was to travel from town to town, not so different from a stand-up comedian, except there was no pressure on him to be funny. He didn't have to please the crowd. He could be as angry and self-indulgent as he wanted to. He could use the same material, the same jokes again and again, and that is exactly what he did. That is what he did until, in his own words, he drove himself crazy. And he drove himself crazy because his methodology is bullshit, his philosophy is bullshit, and politically, the road he chose for himself is a self-defeating dead end. That's why in my first video I said it is a philosophy for losers, and we instead need a political philosophy that puts us in a position where we can win. I'm tempted to end the video right there, but let's go through the rest of this criticism, see if there's anything worth responding to. She says, Gary has tried every approach. He has been there, done that, worn the t-shirt. He has said this before. And the approach he arrived at has been the most effective. etc. You know, this is really like the whole line of reasoning in this video of saying he suffered so much. He tried other approaches and they failed, and then he tried this approach and it also failed. Yeah, he's had a lot of failure. He's had a lot of heartbreak in his life. On some level, I can sympathize with that, but this is actually not an argument that he's the great leader you say he is. It's an argument for the exact opposite, okay? You know who hasn't been a failure, by contrast? PCRM, Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. They have a methodology that works. They have a methodology that doesn't get you put in prison, that doesn't make you look like a buffoon on Israeli television, that doesn't involve, you know, death threats and this violent, you know, inane nonsense you hear out of Gary Yourofsky. I just had quotes. My last video before this has direct quotations showing this guy screaming about holding people at gunpoint and making threats of violence and what have you. Yeah, you know what? It depends on who you're comparing Gary Yourofsky to. I was saying before, it's a different thing. If you compare me to Bill Clinton or you compare me to Gary Yourofsky, there are orders of magnitude involved here. You say Gary has tried every approach. No, he hasn't. He's tried a couple. And they all left him a broken, bitter failure. A self-hating failure, a self-hating vegan who now blames other vegans for his own decision to quit the movement, which is pathetic on many different levels. IMHO. But yeah, bottom line, I'm not going to respect him more for his failure. Yeah, maybe I can sympathize, maybe I can appreciate, maybe I can learn from his failure. You can learn a lot from the study of failed movements. I think you can learn a lot right now from studying the ways in which DXE is failing, Direct Action Everywhere is failing. You can learn a lot from studying PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, study both their successes and their failures. They have both, you know. You can learn a lot from that, no question. But the picture you're trying to paint here of Gary Yourofsky and trying to raise him above criticism and trying to suggest that he is simply too hallowed a figure for me to criticize in the way that I've done is that he has suffered so much and that he's failed so much. Yeah, and those, I completely concede those points. Gary Yourofsky is a long-suffering failure. PCRM, Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, they're coming out of the game esteemed. Yeah, you know what they have in common? PCRM and Gary Yourofsky, they both get interviewed on the TV news. You don't think there were some differences in how the news reporters view them at the end of the interview, how the audience views them, and what the outcomes are, not just for the TV audience, but the future of the vegan movement, in terms of political outcomes? Gary Yourofsky is not the only guy getting on the TV news. Okay, Dr. John McDougall with his starch-based diet. He's been on the TV news a lot. But he is not regarded in the odious way that Gary Yourofsky is. There are other comparisons to make here of leading figures who are not self-destructive, violent, self-described misanthropes. I don't think misanthropy explains this guy's problems at all. You know? So yeah, you got to look at it in this kind of analytical context. Okay? So her criticism goes on to say, quote, "It doesn't surprise me that you are using this opportunity to further your own presentation as that person that you suggest he couldn't be." Close quote. So she's suggesting that I want the same job that Gary Yourofsky wanted. Now, that's not true. I don't want the same things he wants, and that's one of the reasons why there's a meaningful difference between us in terms of political philosophy and organizing method and what have you. Now, it's going to be a really long video if I get into contrasting that. But look, guys, I spent the last year, approximately, learning the Chinese language. That already puts me on a very different path from someone like Gary Yourofsky, for better or worse. What can I do for the future of veganism? Well, I speak Chinese. I speak Chinese pretty well for a guy. I had 7 months of education in Kunming. I'm out here speaking Chinese every day. I'm a former scholar of Buddhism. I have like 10 years of experience living in these parts of Asia. I have a different perspective. I have experience with First Nations, you know, the Cree and Ojibwe in Saskatchewan. I was enrolled as a student. I have a different perspective. I have a different set of political priorities, a different set of concerns. And no, I'm not. I'm not trying to do Emphatically, I'm not trying to do what Gary Yourofsky did, and I'm not trying to get into his lane. And, you know, my perspective on this ultra self-pitying view of him as someone who sacrificed his life. You know, I didn't sacrifice my life to learn the Laotian language. I used to speak Lao pretty well. When I go back to Thailand now, I'm going to be speaking Thai with a Laotian accent. I'm going to be speaking Lao with a Thai accent because it'll be in the northern Thailand where those languages really kind of overlap and intermingle. I speak Lao much better than I speak Thai. But anyway, it would be so ridiculous and so pompous and so self-pitying if I were to suggest to you that I sacrificed to learn the language. It is what it is. I had a period in my life where I literally slept in a bamboo hut underneath a mosquito net in a malaria poverty-stricken area where people were starving. They had seasonal starvation, working for a charity that handed out sacks of rice to starving people, and I was learning 2 languages with no teacher. I never had a teacher for Laotian. I never had a teacher for Pali. Pali is an ancient language that philosophy is written in. It's a canonical language. It's like learning ancient Greek or Latin. And you know what? I mean, you know, it costs you. It cost me 10 years of my life I can't get back. I can't get back those years I spent working on Lao and Cambodia and what have you. But why would you portray this in terms of martyrdom? On some deep level, I mean, this is a Christian cultural expectation. You're not describing him in terms of his accomplishments. And I think he has some. They're not very impressed, but he has some. They would be like, instead of my describing to you what I accomplished doing the humanitarian work, what I accomplished handing out sacks of rice to some starving people, being a part of that project, learning a lot about agriculture, living on a farm, learning about farming, seeing the reality of farm conditions in that third world context, learning a lot about politics and history, learning a lot about languages. Those are the positive accomplishments. But yeah, if I want to be a self-pitying ass, I can talk to you about how sleep deprived I was and the noise pollution and the guy literally sleeping across the hall from me, the next room down the hall. He got malaria while I was there. I mean, my life was in danger, and there were unexploded bombs. There was, landmines and unexploded ordnance. Yeah, there were real dangers. Yeah, but what's the point of describing that in this ultra self-pitying way about how much I suffered and how my life was in danger? I mean, that's not the point. But for you, I'm trying to challenge you on this. You are seeing this in terms of Gary Yourofsky as Christ on the cross. And there is just no truth to that. Gary Yourofsky was a traveling comedian and a traveling salesman for veganism. He wanted to live his dream. Back in 1999, he was a part-time school teacher, part-time substitute teacher, and he got enough notoriety. And as he says himself, a small number of wealthy donors, a small number of rich people put the money in his pockets so that he could live his dream. And just a few days ago, he decided that that dream was a nightmare because too many vegans are pacifist hippies, and he can't stand to answer email from them. So he had the opportunity of a lifetime handed to him repeatedly, and he flushed it down the toilet repeatedly. That is the story of Gary Yourofsky. Towards the end, she says, "You speak of Gary blaming others, but you yourself are nothing but negative towards the movement." Not true at all. Even within this video you've heard, I'm positive about PCRM. I'm positive about aspects of the movement that I think are positive. My criticism is full of saying this is a good direction, this is a bad direction. There are lots of good examples within veganism. Gary Yourofsky is not one of them. She says, if you even have a tenth of the influence that Gary has had in the last 10 years in your lifetime, you should be pleased. Well, there are different kinds of influence that people aim for. Gary Yourofsky influenced a lot of people in a shallow way. And what I do is influencing a small number of people in a profound way. I got some messages, email chatter back and forth, from a younger guy in Europe. And at first he was actually just asking me for advice about learning Chinese. So he's vegan, thinking about studying Chinese, so he's giving some technical advice about, how to approach that and what schools he could enroll in. He wanted to augment his university education. So we talked about that for a while. And at the end of the conversation about that, that topic had come to close. He said to me, look, I might as well mention to you, because he was here asking me for advice about learning Chinese. He said, I've watched every single video on your YouTube channel. And the ones that I really found interesting or intellectually complex, I've seen multiple times. And he said, you have profoundly reshaped the way I think about politics, the way I talk about politics, the way I think about philosophy, talk about philosophy. I've impacted that young man's life in a profound way. Okay? And my videos are not saying the same thing over and over again. Okay? And I sit there and think, wow. Now, that's not the only person to say that to me. I've had quite a number of people write in and tell me about the profound way in which I influenced their lives. And I have more than 500 videos on this channel on all kinds of different topics, from Cambodia to Canada, deep and shallow, about dating and romance, about politics with philosophy of life. But you know, there are a lot of people who have been profoundly influenced by this channel after seeing just 3 or 4 videos. There are some people who get the message from this channel and then they hang up the phone and they get on with their lives. And I respect that too. There are people from this channel who's been really meaningful. They just saw 3 or 4 videos on one topic, said, wow, it changed their direction in their lives. And I know that because they've written to me explaining it. Whether that was changing their direction in terms of vegan activism, changed their direction in terms of another topic totally in politics, or made them look at their assumptions about feeding dead cows to their pet cat or their dog or leather shoes, or people becoming vegan. Have had people write to me who are non-vegans becoming vegan. Okay? So different people are aiming for different types of influence. Is this the type of influence I'm aiming for? What's the type of influence I'm capable of? Because my channel is not activism. My channel is just opening the door and sharing my real life with other people. So there's certain types of influence I can have and certain types I can't when that is your MO. When this is, for me, at the end of a day, I had 4 hours of sleep, taught university class 4 hours, this is what I've got to give. Okay? Writing a storybook about veganism, a vegan children's storybook, in Chinese, translating into English, Japanese, German, getting it illustrated, getting published, that's what I've got to give. Okay? And that's one of the reasons why I'm never going to burn out the way Gary Yourofsky is. Because I have that kind of self-knowledge. Right? I know what I've got to give. And I'm not going to give you more. I'm not going to give you more and then, rant out of a martyrdom complex as if I've suffered out of all proportion to my suffering. Oh, I stayed at 20 different Howard Johnson hotels. I used to sleep at the Days Inn. Oh, really? Really, Gary? Wow. Gee, that sounds terrible. Being paid by donors, having all your living expenses, traveling expenses covered, so you can travel around America and travel around the world talking about veganism. And you have a martyrdom complex with that. You think the problem is you've suffered so much and your audience fails to appreciate you. Dude, Gary Yourofsky is exactly what I said in the title of that video. He is a delusional, self-pitying, hypocritical, bitter, broken loser. And he's a bad example for anyone to follow in the vegan movement. He is only an example of what you should not do. Okay? So what I've just said on my own part is neither humility, nor false humility, nor bragging, nor boasting. I say, I know what I've got to give, whether it's the storybook or coming on camera and talking about these issues now. And I'm not going to try to give more out of a reckless or self-destructive martyrdom complex. And then I'm not going to complain about it afterwards. Oh, I feel like this is Gary Yourofsky's position. He feels that the vegan community doesn't appreciate it. Why are you complaining to me that I don't appreciate him? His problem is he feels the movement is full of pacifists who are incapable of appreciating him. Wow, gee, man, you got a tough road to hoe. And these people who don't appreciate you, they were paying your bills. They were paying for you to travel and sleep in hotels. I don't even know. Maybe he stayed in 5-star hotels. Maybe he stayed at the Paris Hilton. I don't know. Maybe he stayed at 3-star hotels. But he didn't sleep in a cave. Okay? Of any social movement, keep it in perspective. Who has suffered less? And this email from an anonymous critic wraps up by saying, Gary is not perfect. Far from it. He never claimed to be. Okay? Gary is not perfect. Sorry, I didn't say that clearly. He never claimed to be. Right. But you seem to be holding me to a much higher standard than him. I've never said anything as bad as what Gary said, even quoted in my last video, right? And you can look at it side by side. I mean, you can look at me criticizing Durian Rider because I think he makes a misleading claim. When Durian Rider says that he's cured Crohn's disease, I think that's misleading. When Freely the Banana Girl says you can eat unlimited calories without gaining weight, I think that's misleading. Okay, yeah, you can say I'm a really terrible person for doing all that. Fine, and you can put that side by side with Gary screaming about how he wants to murder people. All right, sure, Gary is not perfect. Neither am I. I notice that you hold him to a much lower standard than you hold me. And she then says, for people like you to criticize him as if you are holier than thou is disgraceful and you should be ashamed of yourself. Look, guys, I was a scholar of Buddhism for about 10 years. I think it was more than 10 years. Holier than thou is a real part of my life. Okay? I am someone who's engaged in debates where you literally have to sit down and say, I represent Theravada orthodoxy. I represent the correct interpretation of this ancient passage of Buddhist philosophy. And the Dalai Lama is wrong. And where you have to sit down and talk to people and explain to them why Japanese Buddhism is corrupt and decadent and evil and immoral. And if you go back and read the more ancient texts, you see what Buddhism is supposed to be as a religion. And that kind of criticism I can direct towards Japan, I can direct towards Tibet, I can direct towards all the various forms of Buddhism that from an orthodox Buddhist perspective are immoral and indeed unholy. Okay? So I have had those debates with Buddhist monks in Buddhist monasteries, with academics in universities, and yes, sometimes you are literally criticizing the Dalai Lama and you are literally being holier than thou. Your point is to say, I represent holiness and he represents an unholy or immoral influence by contrast, right? So I'm not really afraid of that. I'm not afraid to take it that far. And if you're really asking me, which you don't ask, but if we take this insult and turn it into a question, do I feel that my approach to veganism is morally superior to that of Gary Yourofsky? My answer is yes, with absolutely no hesitation. In terms of the philosophy, or the morality of it, or the various different ways we can look at this or categorize it. Do I think my approach, the wildlife management approach, is superior to, in a technical sense, in a philosophical sense, or a political sense, is it superior to Gary Francione, to Will Tuttle, to Gary Yourofsky? Yes. I think I'm asking the right questions, and I think I'm giving the right answers to a whole series of challenging, difficult questions within the movement today and that pertain to the future. Do I think I have a better methodology? Yes. Okay? And morally and ethically, do I think my approach and what I preach and teach to people is better than what Gary does? Yes. Have I seen Gary Yourofsky's approach harm people? Yes. And again, I can say that about Durian Rider and other people too, where these people, what they're preaching, it's not harmless. It has really negative impacts on people's lives. And I've known enough vegans, I've been privileged enough to know enough vegans, that I've seen people who've really been harmed by what this guy as a guru preaches, teaches, and practices. So, if your point is to snub me because you feel that I am holier than thou, what I have to say is, we can be as polite about it as possible. And Gary Yourofsky isn't. I mean, you're really calling me holier than thou in contrast to Gary Yourofsky? Again, the contrast is not to Bill Clinton, right? So your point is, compared to Gary Yourofsky, I am too self-confident, I'm too abrasive, I'm not diplomatic enough, I'm not self-effacing or humble. Compared to Gary Yourofsky, that's the comparison you're making. Compared to a lot of people, I might come out badly in the comparison. But you're comparing my modus operandi to Gary Yourofsky. And you are claiming that I am more egotistical and I am more judgmental than Gary Yourofsky. You think there's been anyone in this game more judgmental, more egotistical than Gary Yourofsky? Really? Really, though? Really? Oh, Gary Yourofsky, I'm so glad that you're gone. Good riddance. So to wrap up the video, I think her second last sentence here is to say, Gary Yourofsky is not a politician. You are. Thank you. It's a compliment. But I got bad news for you. As I said 45 minutes ago in this video, veganism is a political movement. It is a political philosophy. It is politicized for the following fundamental reason. If I just decide to go vegan as a matter of personal purity or personal health, then it's equivalent to just quitting smoking. Quitting smoking is not a political movement. It's not a political philosophy. But if I decide that for the future of the planet, for the future of the animals on this planet, for the future of human health, for whatever reason, for whatever ethical reason, if I decide, you know what, it's not just about me. It's not about my personal purity. It's not about my personal health. I want everyone to go vegan. I want as many people as possible to go vegan. I don't just want me to quit smoking. I want everyone to quit smoking. Therefore, the anti-smoking movement becomes politicized. It ceases to be a personal struggle and it becomes a political struggle because it has its eyes fast on the horizon of a social and cultural change. And that cultural change must be, in part, accomplished through political means. Okay? You can claim as an excuse for Gary Yourofsky, you can claim that he's not a politician. But the truth is, he's sleepwalking through politics. He is just a goddamn awful politician. And if you compare him to me, he looks bad. If you compare him to Bill Clinton, he looks bad. And if you compare what he accomplished in his decades-long career to what PCRM, Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, if you compare those two, Gary Yourofsky does indeed seem like a pathetic footnote in the history of 21st century veganism.